Hello everyone. When I first started this channel, one of the questions I was getting asked a lot was how I could be confident in the beliefs I was portraying in this channel specifically. For instance, one of the main doubts I was receiving was the fact that I'm a person of science. I have 2 degrees in microbiology and cell science and biochemistry. I'm continuing my education still in the scientific field. And therefore, a lot of people could not see how somebody who has such a scientific mindset could have beliefs that were so much out of the ordinary. Because traditionally, although the esoteric practices are more acceptable today, they weren't always so accepted in the past. And this video also wants to specifically talk to those of you who may have doubts about the existence of a higher power. Perhaps you have some sort of a faith or spirituality, but many times you may question it. So this brings me back to my past. Back when I was in middle school, I became really interested in the sciences and particularly math. And then once I got into high school, during my first year of high school, one of my mathematics instructors became one of the most pivotal individuals in my life. Everything she stated when it came to math and the amount of times she referred to things outside of math that were, although relevant within the mathematics field, became really, really influential in my life. One of the things she always described, particularly in the beginning when we started the very basics fundamentals of geometry, was that geometry is still a science. Everything that we do in geometry has to be demonstrated. We were called to demonstrate in front of the class why one statement could be true. And you had to follow a logical process, and you also had to know the previous geometry to get to your solution. But she always stressed on the fact that geometry is faith-based because we have statements called axioms which cannot be demonstrated to be true. However, we consider them as true. And when we consider them as true, we actually allow for this science to happen and all of the implications of geometry. Because think about it. We use geometry for building houses, furniture, anything that has a shape and can be built has geometry behind it. So let's go over these axioms. Particularly, I want to go over 5. These are the Euclid's 5 postulate. And I'm going to go one by one and describe them to you. So the first one is the line postulate. The line postulate states a straight line can be drawn between any 2 points. So we have point A, point B, and we're able to draw one line and one line only between these 2 points. Okay, we don't think about a second line because the second line may go through one point, but it may not be able to go through the other one. Then we had the extension postulate. The extension postulate states that a fine straight line segment can be continuously extended in a straight line. So we have a finite straight line segment, means it's got beginning and an end, and then we can actually extend it to a continuous straight line. Then we have the circle postulate. The circle postulate says that a circle can be drawn with any point as a center. So we pick the center and we draw the circle, and any straight line as a radius. So any straight line segment can work as the radius of the circle. So now we have the circle, we have always a center, there's only one center in the circle, and we can always draw at least one straight line to be the radius. Then we have the right angle postulate. The right angle postulate states that all right angles are equal to one another. Each right angle will be the same to the other one. 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees everywhere. Finally, we have the parallel postulate. The parallel postulate states if a straight line intersects 2 other straight lines and the interior angles on the same side are less than 2 right angles, then the 2 straight lines will eventually intersect on that side. It's a little bit more complex to explain. Okay, so if we have a straight line, we have 2 other straight lines. and we don't know what kind of angle they form. We know that we have one straight line that intersects two. The interior angles on the same side are less than two right angles, so we're not having two perpendicular lines going against one. We have lines that go at a specific angle that is less than a right angle. What we know is that the two straight lines will eventually intersect on this side. What it's telling you is that two lines that are parallels, they will never intersect at any point. They will continue to infinity and they will never meet. Two lines where we have angles, two lines that intersect the main straight line but have angles that are less than 90 degrees, they will eventually meet in one point. So all of this is really interesting because all of these statements cannot be demonstrated in any specific way. We utilize these 5 statements in order to build the geometry around us. And a lot of it was intuitive. We all live in a 3-dimensional world, at least we perceive it as 3-dimensional. And we know that between any 2 points, we can have one straight line only. So whether we think in a 1-dimensional or in a bidimensional or in a 3-dimensional level, these 5 statements make sense. They're pretty much something that we perceive as true through our intuition. Religious scholars may have taken this and used it as confirmation that you can't do anything in life without faith. You have to have belief into something in order to make something work. With geometry, we don't stress about the fact that these statements may not be true, but what we know is that if we assume that these statements are true, then the system that we can create in place, which is geometry, as we know, Euclidean geometry, allows us to build things, allows us to have real effects and real help to the purpose of advancing humanity and allowing it to grow. So we can make the same parallelism with the idea of faith. The faith in God, especially if it's well-founded, allows you to create a system in place that can potentially help you give help to humanity. And of course, we have all kinds of faiths in the world. There are faiths that are based on political ideology, and perhaps they don't manifest as something good in the world. They manifest into really negative things, such as violence and war. But we also have faiths that, for the most part, they tend to be good. And for that reason, the reason why I did this video was not to necessarily argue with atheists, because although we do have a science, geometry, that utilizes the statements and faith towards the statement to create the science that we know as geometry, we also know that we can change the statements. We can have non-Euclidean geometry when indeed between 2 points we can actually have more than one straight line. And in addition to that, having faith towards the statements doesn't necessarily prove that there is a higher deity. But what it does is break down one of the essential paradigm of atheism, which is the fact that everything can be demonstrated by science and therefore there is no God. At least from a strict atheistic perspective, there is no God. And what geometry informs us of is the fact that we can actually utilize geometry to tell us that perhaps there could be a God, that we may never know whether it's true or not, just like for the axioms. We don't know what the factual truth is. We just assume that they're true. But it's potentially, it can move somebody from atheism to agnosticism, because in agnosticism, there is the perception that there may be a deity of some sort, but we're not concerned with it. So it's a different perspective. It's more open-minded that simply stating there is no God and accepting the consequences of that statement. From the agnostic perspective, at least, there is the potential of a God or higher power or powers, plural, but we may never know it and we're not concerned with it. And of course, I'm not either. I'm not agnostic and I'm not atheistic either. I read a lot of philosophies in the past about this school of thought. I decided to embrace spirituality instead. And I don't have necessarily a religion I follow, but I have a spirituality that encompasses a lot of ideas from different religions. I believe that each religion, just like geometry, we have Euclidean geometry and non-Euclidean geometries, but each religion essentially will lead us to one thing, and that's source, that's the higher power. And therefore, this video was not necessarily to argue whether God exists or not, but it was mostly to create thoughts in your head, to allow you to get out of your box, particularly if you embrace an atheistic point of view. Get out of your box and just look at the world outside you and understand their different perspectives, and they may be valid. So it's my invitation to you to be open-minded. Finally, because we started a conversation in geometry, this is going to bring me to my sacred geometry series. Very soon I will start with very basic stuff, just the understanding of basic sacred geometry, and then building up from it. Thank you so much for listening.